Hi, everybody. I always feel like a DJ, like trying to get everything together in the last minute. Hello, welcome. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today, as the title suggests, we're going to be talking a little bit about how to utilize skills-based hiring. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, Clayton Lord, the director for the SHRM Foundation. Clay, thank you so much for coming on.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Clay oversees strategy, planning, program delivery, and program evaluation for the SHRM Foundation, the 501c3 philanthropic arm of SHRM, which focuses on widening pathways to work and helping every worker thrive by empowering HR leaders to focus on social good. He is a social impact executive with 20 years experience nurturing and evaluating complex initiatives that drives systematic change. So we're going to be talking a lot about, what that change looks like, obviously from the root cause of it, from the hiring perspective, and, a little bit obviously on what skills-based hiring even is to begin with.
Sure.
Yeah. It's going to be great. Awesome. So I know a lot of you have been here before. Welcome back. If so, for those that are new, just a really quick walkthrough of our webinar platform here. On the right side, we have our great, awesome chat box. There you can throw in any questions that you have throughout the webinar. I highly encourage it. We will have a Q&A with Clay at the last 15 minutes or so. To get everyone acquainted, I love to just have you throw in where you are dialing in from. So today I'm coming in from Chicago, where the weather is nice. Summer is finally here. It only took until August. It's here. So I would love to hear where you're dialing in from, and feel free to throw in any questions you have throughout the webinar. Just write in the chat box there. Awesome. Welcome, Samantha from Sacramento. This is great. Thank you, guys. While everyone's getting acquainted with that, we also have a couple poll questions throughout the webinar itself. Those are going to slide up right on the bottom left of your screen. It's a great way for us to kind of interact with you guys, for you guys to get a sense of where everybody else's heads are at. And yeah, this is great. Oh my God, Andrea, Jamaica. I'm jealous. What's it like over there? That's awesome. This is awesome. Jill from York. I love it. Great. This is great to see you guys. Thank you so much. And then we do have a handout, a little goodie bag, I like to call it, at the very end. It's actually a really awesome handout that Clay provided on rebalancing talent. And there's also a link I will be sharing at the very end, a toolkit on skills credentials. This is awesome. This is another piece of information, another handout from SHRM specifically. So I know a lot of you guys are SHRM members. Feel free to check it out. I will hand it out at the very end. For those who are SHRM and HRCI members, we are offering PDC ID credits for both of these groups. So be sure to, again, stick around at the very end. This is only also if you're watching this live. So for those of you who are dropping in where you're coming in from the chat, this is a PDC ID for you. So thank you guys for coming. Finally, wrap it all up. To give a little background on workforce.com, we are HCM software that specializes for businesses with hourly staff. And really, we run these webinars just as a way to present our learnings and data and some intel from our own clients. Awesome. Okay, we got all that out of the way. Perfect. Clay, first and foremost, I'd love for you to tell me about some of the work you do and the teams that you work with over at SHRM.
Sure. Well, first, it's great to meet all of you. Thank you so much for being here today. And Meredith, thank you so much for having me. As Meredith said, I'm the director of programs for the SHRM Foundation, which is the 501c3 nonprofit arm of SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, as many of you I'm sure know. And in that role and within the foundation generally, our work is really focused on trying to help empower HR professionals as well as managers of people and C-suite executives to be forces for social good in various ways. And one of the main ways that we do that is by creating programs and services and commissioning research and conducting communities of practice and convening, particularly around widening pathways to work, a lot of which is focused on this conversation about skills-based hiring and retention. And so in that context, we work with a lot of different folks, including within SHRM. So we have deep connectivity with our research team, our SHRM Labs team, which is our venture capitalist startup team. We have a great conversation with every once in a while about startups in the skills space. And some of you may be hearing from a lot of those startups, not necessarily just related to SHRM Labs, but our research shows that there's just a kind of explosion in terms of new technology options available in that space, and that actually can be part of the challenge in terms of adoption. And then we also work with a lot of partners like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, the Business Roundtable, Jobs for the Future, Opportunity at Work, Education Design Lab, lots of folks working in this space right now. And I will tell you that the number one thing that we hear is missing in a lot of those conversations, which is part of what we're trying to drive change around, is the employer voice, and making sure that the solutions that are being articulated and even the problem that's being articulated is being articulated with employers when it comes to this really important conversation about the sort of shift from looking at degrees as the primary arbiter of whether someone can succeed in a job towards looking at a more holistic understanding of skills, whether that is a PhD or whether it's a professional driver's license or whether it's anything in between, like the million+ credentials that are out there in the world today.
I find that so interesting. There's been a lot of conversations, and I'm going to go off on a little tangent for a second, so everyone bear with me, but there's been a lot of conversations lately on, people hiring people that don't necessarily have degrees and making sure that, hey, they actually have the experience from this job in the past, or even, a hospitality gig here, a retail gig here, whatever it might be, and building their resume from that perspective, opposed to, hey, education's at the very top of that resume. It's always looked at first. In reality, maybe it should actually be at the bottom. It might be controversial, but I think that's such an interesting point. Clay, my question for you is what exactly, or, how do you define skills-based hiring? What does that mean for you? And how does it maybe differ within the hourly wage industries? Because I know that's a really big debate too.
Well, and it's interesting. I think there is a challenge of vocabulary there, where there are a lot of different definitions, and they range also because there are different participants in that world, right? So there's educators, there are the employers, there are folks who are advocates for talent, there's talent in general. And so from our perspective, skills-based hiring and retention strategies are strategies that basically take into account three sort of sides of a triangle. Mm-hmm. The first is hard skills. So being able to assess the kind of hard skills that someone has that are required for the functionality of the job. And that is particularly true in sort of hourly professions. It's also true in salaried professions, where you've got specific things like, I need to know how to use Excel. I need to know how to design something in a computer program. I need to know how to climb up an electrical pole and fix a box that has gotten blown out, right? And then the second side of that triangle is what we call soft skills or durable skills. They're also sometimes called 21st century skills. And those are the sort of more ineffable things that often end up getting proxied when people are looking at resumes by a degree, unfairly. But people assume that things like being able to think critically, being able to have dialogues with people from different backgrounds, being able to engage in social situations is something that you learn in part through the attendance at a 2 or 4 year institution. And we know that that's not true. It's never been true, but we know it's particularly not true anymore because of all of the different avenues that people have to generate those skills over time. Mm-hmm. And also because there are actually credentialing programs out there now that can train people on how to, on having those soft skills, and actually can credential them to say, this person has passed some sort of adjudication that lets us know that they know how to think critically. And then the third side of that triangle is what we call aptitude. And aptitude has both good and bad connotations. In this sense, what we really just mean is the natural inclinations of people, and how those natural inclinations of people and the natural things they're passionate about, natural things they have inherent skills about, things that they have accumulated over the course of their life, can play into placing them on a career trajectory that is going to lean into those positives and allow them to feel informed and fulfilled at work, and also allow them a pathway towards further economic mobility, which is a really, really important sort of promise of a skills-based hiring and retention mindset, in that it opens up pathways that have been closed off to the 62% of all Americans who are working age and don't have a 2 or 4 year degree right now. And that's 74 million jobs a year that come up, and about 3/4 of them currently have a degree requirement. So all 62% of those people are pursuing 25% of the opportunities. And that is, of course, problematic, right? And so we're trying to figure out how to fix that. And it's problematic not just for talent, but also for employers, which is sort of the important part, and the part that the SHRM Foundation is particularly vested in, is that this practice does not actually serve employers well, generally speaking, and is the way it is for lots of good reasons. But if we can get some certain things in place that make it possible for employers to leap into this new paradigm, we know that there will be significant benefit in terms of access to talent, diversity of talent, the retention rates of talent, the growth potential of talent, et cetera, over time.
I think that the difference between hard and soft skills is very key. It's very pertinent. And we'll be talking a lot about that later. Carmen, I see webinar keeps freezing. Try refreshing. Sometimes it just lags a little bit, but it is going to be recorded. I will be sending out the recording to everybody just as an FYI. Quickly, I want to point to this first slide, this awesome slide, just to kind of cushion some of the statistics that you mentioned, Clay. We have this great article from Tuscarora, how to use skills-based hiring for blue-collar jobs. And again, this is a very interesting topic, you know, how we use skills hiring for essentially hourly workforces, hourly wage employees. And I think this last quote at the very end, 91% of companies that use skills-based saw increased workplace diversity, with 72.1% of employees reporting they're happy in their roles. Clay, does this kind of, you know, coincide with what you're seeing over at the foundation?
Yeah, I mean, I will say yes, generally speaking, it's always important to note that one employer is one employer, and that talking about employers in aggregate can be somewhat difficult. But I will say that there's a lot of useful, or a lot of kind of emerging data that says that folks who enter into pathways that have historically maybe had them locked out and do so through a skills mindset or through other initiatives that change the hiring paradigm are more loyal. They tend to work harder. They often have better outcomes than folks who are hired off of sort of more traditional methods of assessment, like looking at degrees. You know, we look, one specific example, apprenticeships are a skills-based hiring strategy. Essentially, they're an earn and learn model where you are selecting someone not based on what they already know how to do, but what they have the promise of knowing how to do, and then you're investing in them. And we know that for apprentices, 90% of them end up retaining at their positions, which is a huge number, particularly compared to the sort of general retention figures that are around today. And what we know is sort of behind that is that there is a perception of loyalty, that the company invested in them. There's a perception of sort of gratitude and opportunity, because they often are in positions that they feel like they might not have accessed without the ability to use an apprenticeship to get there. And then also, they've been trained on exactly what the company is looking for. So they're not being trained on sort of the general idea of what this job would be. They are being brought in and trained on exactly what that company is looking for. And so that can create sort of better opportunities for success for them over time.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's an interesting balance, and this is something I've been hearing a lot, you know, from our HR audience, and I'm sure a lot of people can apply this, but there's this weird dichotomy of, you know, employees coming up and saying, hey, I really want to know how to do this, and it not necessarily applying to the job that they're actually working in. And, you know, they're like, okay, well, how do I, you know, increase loyalty? How do I increase retention? All that stuff. And I think it's an interesting balance, but it's something that's really important to obviously train in the sense of, this is a job that needs to be done. This is what you're going to be doing. Here's the skills you need to know, versus, okay, now that you're on board, here's, you know, we're open ears. Like, here's what you can do. Here's everything that you have available. And I think it's an interesting balance, because I think there's that idea of retention that really needs to be met, and lack of turnover.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so you sort of, in those comments, you have put together sort of three different ways that skills enter the conversation, right? So one is, what happens when both talent and also employers articulate what they are looking for in the language of skills, instead of how it currently happens, which is in sort of the language of sort of abstracted experience and proxies of skills. And so one of the interesting emerging spaces, a lot of those startups I was talking about, what they're trying to do is use AI and other emergent technologies to look in aggregate at not just a person's resume, but also things like their military record, also other experiences that they put in that are sort of less formal than a resume, and scoop out from that specific skill sets. And then to look at job descriptions and scoop out from that specific skill sets, and be able to say, these folks match in these skills spaces. So that's one thing. the second thing, and it goes to, I think, both of the general idea of how someone navigates into a job and through a job, and then also these retention questions you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So by having a skills mindset when it comes to upskilling and reskilling people who are already with you, one, it allows for you as an employer to articulate pathways of promotion, pathways of success over time, as well as metrics of success for those employees that can be less transparent and or less invisible and more visible. There's a lot of unspoken things in the workplace right now when it comes to how do I navigate to the next step in my career? It's often very vague. And one thing that you can do with certain skills-based hiring and retention strategies is you can make it specific. You can say, this is the trajectory, this is the job pathway for this specific job to that specific job to that specific job over time. And that creates a sense of loyalty as well as certainty among employees and allows them, particularly if you also then implement, and here's the skills, here is the training that you need to take in part to get there. Like you also have to do demonstration and you also have to like be good at your job, right? But here are the specific things that you can stack up and then knock down and then move to that next level. And then the other thing, the third thing that I heard you say there has to do with general retention and professional development. And there's this thing that happened like 15 or 20 years ago where the economics of professionally developing your team that you had versus hiring someone new who already had those skills flipped in a way that proved to be unhealthy. It became cheaper to just hire someone new. And so a lot of companies cut back on all their PD budgets, they outsourced their professional development, et cetera. And often when they had someone who had a deficit in terms of certain skills that were necessary for the job, they would remove that person from that position and just go hire someone else who who already had those skills. What has happened in the last 5 to 10 years, and it sort of snuck up on folks, but is now definitely the paradigm, is that it costs a lot more money to find someone new than it does to keep someone. And then the other thing that has started to pervade much more is this sort of philosophy that it's better to train someone and have them leave you than to not train them and have them stay. And so we do see this sort of growth and influx of sort of like internalized professional development and growth opportunity. And one of the great outgrowths of that is that if you are being invested in by your organization, there's all sorts of data that says that you are more positive about your organization, you're mentally healthier in that organization, you work harder in that organization, you take fewer sick days, you take less time off generally because you like being there and you like doing what you're doing. And so all of that can sort of be credited, at least in part, to the implementation of a skills-based hiring and retention mindset.
I was just looking up, I just wanted to double check this. I actually just saw an article that Pennsylvania put up $400 million to address upskilling in the construction industry. So, you know, I'm looking at Jill, I'm looking at Roxy over in Pennsylvania. It's crazy how much that this is actually taking off in the upskilling and skills based and everything just pertaining to training. And we can do a whole other webinar on, you know, once you're in the door, you know, what that training looks like and exactly how that actually looks. But I want to go into effective skill assessment and, you know, what that looks like, what that means to you. So Clay, my question is, what are some effective strategies or tools HR professionals can use to assess the skills of potential hires more efficiently?
Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of $1 million question right now, because, you know, so our data says, and this is going to get to your answer, but just to sort of run on the side road for a second. Our data says that when asked, about 9 in 10 HR professionals say abstractly that doing a skills-based hiring strategy makes a lot of sense. But only about 15% of them actually do it. And say, and when we dig into that, it's not that you know, employers are villains. It's not that they're trying to keep people down. What it comes down to is that employers are made up of humans who have all sorts of stresses and stressors that sort of create the decision-making matrix for them about anything. And in this case, what they're being asked to do is substantially shift the way that they do a fundamental part of their job. And so, you know, in tackling that, we look at 3 different challenges. One is sort of the ROI of a skills-based hiring mindset versus a degree mindset. You know, we had a kind of focus group about 6 months ago where one of the participants who was a CHRO said that she on average has about 20 minutes to look at 200 resumes and identify the top 5 candidates to pass along to a hiring manager. That is not very much time. Yeah. And so if you are saying, well, instead of taking those 20 minutes to look at those 200 resumes, you could take 2 hours to navigate this new product and figure out how you can use AI to find a wider spectrum of candidates. That's not a great ROI. So there are interesting products in the space, and there's sort of some emergent work happening, including with major ATS and HRIS providers to make sort of assessing on skills something that happens more organically. So it's just part of your normal process. But right now it's a little bit more clunky than that. So there are some tools, for example, there's Markle Foundation and Education Design Lab have something called the Skilled Job Description Generator. And that's a great tool because what it does is it sort of walks you through a process of creating a job description that is inherently skills-based so that you don't have to do it yourself. It's sort of a very, very assisted tool. Yeah. It makes it possible for you to have a general idea of what you're looking for and to generate something that ideally doesn't sort of rely on unspoken things nestled in that space around degrees or around experience. It sort of makes explicit the things that sometimes get hidden. The second area where we see a lot of struggles for HR providers is this challenge around assessing the quality and trusting the things that are out there. So when you talk about a skills-based hiring and retention mindset, one of the tricks is that, you know, right now a degree stands in for a lot of things. And sometimes that's justified and sometimes it's not, but that's the system that it is. If you go to a certain type of school, you're viewed in a certain type of way. And that's either good or bad. Or at least either true or false. Right. But if you move into a skills-based hiring mindset and are instead adjudicating based on here is the stack of skills I say I learned, and here's where I said I learned them, there are over 1 million different credentialing options provided by 56,000 different providers all across the world at this point, right? And that number has gone from much smaller than that, about 250,000 to 1 million in the last 5 years. So it's on an exponential growth curve. And so that creates a circumstance where it's sort of easier to work with the devil you know than trust the devil you don't. Sure. And so there are some interesting products out there. One is called Credential Engine. And I will say Credential Engine has a lot of promise and is currently a little bit hard to navigate. But what it has done is it has taken all of those credentials that are out there in the world, and it has tried to categorize them, provide sort of basic understanding of what they do and don't provide based on the actual content of the credential. And then over time, they're trying to implement sort of like rating and assessment strategies. SHRM also has a product that just launched a couple months ago. So any of you who are SHRM members, if you haven't yet, I'd encourage you to visit the Workplace Tech community, which is part of SHRM Labs. And it's basically a TripAdvisor for workplace tech. And what it allows is in a safe environment where the only people who are there are members of SHRM, who are all HR folks, you can go in and indicate, I use these products and services, and I think they're great, or I think they are less than great. And here is why. You can give sort of commentary on that. And in doing that, they're trying to create an environment where the trust in certain products and services can be built in the community of HR providers or HR professionals who are already trusted by each other, right? And then the third thing that we have identified as a challenge for HR professionals is basically scaling and isolation. So if you are choosing to move into this place, it feels like you're alone in a very large house right now, and also that you're building, a whole wall with little tiny Legos. So, there are some really great networks that already exist that are kind of working to create communities of practice among skills-based hiring and retention advocates. And we also at SHRM, we have things like our Knowledge Center, which is for members, is an opportunity to call in and connect with a professional in HR who has expertise and can answer your questions or figure out the answers if they don't know them off the top of their head. And then also there are, other networks that exist. If you have ever done any Google certifications, there's actually a network of Google folks who use those certificates. There's a similar network of IBM folks who use IBM certificates to kind of adjudicate skills. And so there are sort of pockets of that right now, and we're looking to try and make that more comprehensive over time.
That's awesome. That's it's so interesting to hear about the definition process of actually looking into the skills, having that definition set for the entire team, like not even the entire team, the entire company, right? I think it's really important that these skills are actually defined across the board. Every manager has the same skill definition, whether or not they're actually looking for those skills in particular. We actually had a really interesting client of ours, Winnipeg Jets. It's a hockey team. I'm not sure if you guys heard of it. They're awesome. But they're our client, and they actually use this feature called qualifications. It's really interesting, but pretty much it helps them actually pin down what skills more or less need to be filled. And they're able to, quickly backfill employees if there's like a no call, no show, whatever it might be. And they're easy to see, hey, we need Jim backfilled by Sarah because Sarah is able to do so because she's actually qualified in these specific skills. Mm-hmm. So again, having those across the board is huge, and they have loved it, obviously for scheduling and, admin purposes, of course, but not even that, but able to detect what skills need to be filled more. They're like, hey, we need more people like Sarah out there who is skilled in this, and this, A, B, and C. And we don't have a lot of people who are actually skilled in A and B, whatever that might be. So detecting those is interesting.
There's just one other product that what you just said sort of reminded me of. Education Design Lab, which is one of our partners. I don't know if it's actually out there in the wild yet, but they are working on something called the T profile. And it's called the T profile because it's literally shaped like a T. And across the top are mostly soft skills, 21st century skills that are sort of generally always required for people to function in specific work environments, right? And then the kind of down of the T are the specific deep skills that are necessary for specific positions. And the idea is both to be able to use that to articulate a T profile for a position, and then also to use that to articulate a T profile for an individual. So that, to your point, you would be able to have a cadre of individuals and know, okay, all of these folks satisfy the basic requirements of soft skills in terms of being able to work together, being able to work with others, being able to communicate, et cetera, whatever those priorities are for your organization. And then also this subset of people knows how to manage a box office, and whatever that means. Manage a box office, of course, not a skill. I mean, it is, but it would be articulated in sort of a more micro way in terms of being able to count, process funds or use technology or whatever. And they'd be sort of micro badged in that way to understand, okay, so this person can match with this open slot that I have right now.
I love that. That's so smart. And yeah, again, a lot of these hourly wage industries are micro skills. We're talking customer service type skills. Are you able to hold a conversation? Are you able to, put a smile on, anything like that? And I think, again, we'll go more into hard and soft skills. I think that really feeds into the big picture of what it looks like when it comes to skills-based hiring, is getting micro with it, get pretty small. What are some common challenges or even mistakes that you see, industries make when they are trying to implement skills-based hiring techniques?
More challenges than mistakes, I would say. But I think that, the big challenge, and you just sort of pointed to one, as did I, is that we're basically atomizing something that was aggregated before. And that can mean it suddenly becomes very complicated and time consuming to get to basically the same result, right? And so back to the sort of challenges of ROI and trying to convince someone to do something new, that's not like a great dynamic to be like, you had something simple, we'd like you to do something complicated instead.
Yeah.
So, I think that where I think these emergent technologies and these sort of intervening places like workforce can sort of play a role is in ensuring that easy button that HR professionals have never stops being an easy button.
Yeah.
So that there's a lot of sort of back end stuff. But really, when it comes down to it, if we want employers to take part, it can't be that different from what they're doing right now. And ideally, it actually needs to be better. It needs to be as easy, but yield better outcomes. So, we're in a process right now, again, Education Design Lab, I mentioned them earlier, but also some of our other partners like Climb Hire, which specializes in social capital and soft skills, Merit America, et cetera. We're having a dialogue about what we can do to sort of articulate that journey from sort of tech thinking up something to employers actually having something that they can use on the other end. And so far, what it seems to come down to is I'd like it to work better and give me better candidates, but I don't want to know much more about it than that, please, because I am overwhelmed with everything else that's going on in my job. So, I don't know if that's a challenge, but that's certainly a reality.
For sure. And I think there's that aspect of like the tangibility of these things. And I like to think, like things like workforce, it's something where it feels a little more tangible, knowing it's like literally in the palm of your hand, whether it's your phone or on your desktop, and something that you're actually seeing and analyzing firsthand and looking at the data of it. And skills are something that's really, really hard to cultivate, to actually imagine. And I think stuff like this, where you're actually putting it essentially pen to paper kind of style and saying, hey, this is what it looks like, and this is what we're looking for, and here's our ideal candidate.
Yeah. I think that the one other thing to throw in on that point is that, so our data says that whether it's a very bifurcated conversation between hiring and retention and growth when it comes to skills. And so once you have someone, like I've been working for 22, 23 years at this point, right? And so my educational background doesn't really matter. But also the kind of level that I'm at, because I've moved through the ranks based on experiences I've had, means that I then am in a sort of different types of conversations if I'm trying to find a new job.
Yeah.
And informally, many of those conversations end up being about the stuff you know how to do, as opposed to the stuff you learned in a formal setting.
Yeah.
So, but what that means is, and then, so when you're first trying to enter the workforce, or when you're trying to jump from place to place, and you don't have practical experience as the thing that you can list, the thing that you have to be able to list is all of the other skills that you've sort of accumulated in your life. And right now that's proxies into education, formal education. But that's part of the paradigm around hiring. In the retention space and the upskilling space or growth space, the opportunity to learn new things is something that's really important generally, and is becoming more and more important based on the pace at which new things are becoming the things everyone has to know. So I was in a convening that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation put together called the T3 Innovation Summit a couple of weeks ago. And one of the people who, it was all about skills, but one of the people was saying that they thought that within 5 years, because my backfall on all of this is usually maybe I'll be retired by the time that becomes a thing anyway, right? But within 5 years, they anticipate that 9 out of 10 jobs will have to be competent on AI. Wow. 9 out of 10 jobs that exist right now will have to have been upskilled into being competent about AI. And then on top of that, there'll be all sorts of jobs that are literally just about AI. And that's a different paradigm. Things didn't move that fast before. And so that's where upskilling becomes a business imperative as well as a personal imperative, if your business wants to keep up with the ways of working in the world and the country.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, again, like I'm loving this conversation because there's like 6 different webinars we can do on all of this. The topic of AI and the topic of upskilling on AI is so interesting. And especially within hourly wage industries where a lot of them are working in person, they're like, this isn't going to, impact me. It will. I definitely can guarantee it will. And again, I don't want to get on the tangent too much, but I think that's such an interesting point. I want to point very quickly. I actually sent out a poll question a couple minutes ago. I asked, what type of skills assessment method do you find most effective in identifying and evaluating your candidate's abilities? And almost 50% are saying scenario-based questions and practical exercises during interviews. Some people are saying skills testing and assessment tailored to job requirements. Other people are saying soft skill evaluation through behavioral assessments. Clay, is this something that you're kind of seeing within the foundation and that section? Yeah.
So yes, and so there was a question earlier. I think maybe it dropped into Q&A. It was in the chat for a second that was sort of asking about how do you how do you assess when you're asking for 5 years experience as a carpenter and you're getting someone who has incremental experience over time that may pile up into that or not? How do you deal with that? And that and a lot of other similar questions are really at the front of a lot of this skills conversation, because in part, the idea is to expand the pool beyond the people who you would just like look at a page for a couple minutes and say, yeah, I think this person can sort of do this job. And so certain places are absolutely incorporating alternative ways of assessing candidates when they come in the door. In the most extreme case, I've heard of an organization that no longer provides hiring managers with resumes. They provide them with, they work with the hiring manager to get a couple of questions that they would like people to sort of provide a narrative response to. And that narrative response becomes the basis, not of like the whole process, but of the basis of getting through a first round and into an in-person interview where they can then talk more formally about their stuff.
Wow.
I've also heard of organizations that have created real life practicums or virtual practicums. So, you know, show me a video of you putting a needle in a vein if you're trying to become a phlebotomist. Or here is a tech simulation of a tech, you know, a kind of processing line task. I need you to articulate how you would make this more efficient over time by doing it in real time, that sort of thing. And I think all that's really exciting because it does line up with people demonstrating their abilities. Here's the trick. Those things all take time. They take time on the part of the HR professional. They take time on the part of the hiring manager. Mm-hmm. You know, I was in that same T3 conversation, and someone was talking about how excited they were about some of these new LERs, which are learning and employment records. They're sort of like virtual resumes that have the potential to allow you to upload you putting a needle in an arm. If that's part of the requirement of a job, you could like go into your bank and shove that over and say, yes, indeed, I know how to do that. And then I sort of raised my hand and I said, okay, 200 resumes coming in for one position. Let's say that happens. That means that some poor HR professional, if they're doing their due diligence, has to watch 200 people have a video of putting a needle in an arm, which one may be sort of difficult for like personal reasons, but also is time. And so again, I think that there's this significant opportunity for intermediary technologies to badge things like that, to say, this person has shown us that they have the technical expertise to put a needle in an arm, or this person has shown us that they have the technical expertise for the components that make up 5 years as a carpenter. Mm-hmm. And the trick is that they have to be a trusted enough source of saying that this person actually has those skills, that an employer can trust them implicitly rather than having to test all of those skills independently. And that is the crux of why we have a degrees-based system right now, because we've all just sort of, for 50, 60 years, just generally decided that a degree is being conferred with quality.
Yeah. And
so that's actually what's breaking down right now, is everyone is sort of starting to question like, oh, is this just a racket? And so putting something in its place still requires to kind of start from a place of, if I don't have time to do this myself, I need to have a third party that is telling me, yes, indeed, this person has the things that I can trust, so that when I hire that person, they're not going to fail.
Sharon threw in a really interesting comment in the chat talking about, the biggest need is developing skills in people and finding people who can get along well with other people. And that's getting more and more difficult to find, and finding reliable testing or interviewing techniques is not easy. This points me perfectly to this next question. In, talking about the very, very beginning, talking about really implementing that skills-based hiring from the get-go. So my question for you is, how can organizations actually incorporate those identified skills into job descriptions, into advertising, just to attract the right candidate?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good question. And Sharon, I think your point is really well taken. Mm-hmm. I think one thing to note when we talk about skills-based hiring, generally speaking, and it varies from employer to employer, that is not only skills-based hiring, right? So in the same way that you go through phases of interviewing now, and that, one of the challenges is that if you've got an applicant tracking system, it knocks out people who don't have degrees because it has been trained to move people through who have degrees. But then those people who get through eventually talk to a human and can be assessed on things that are more soft skills oriented, like being able to get along well with other people or being able to integrate in culture or whatever. That would still maintain, it's really in that first space of like, does this person meet the basic general requirements of a job as defined in a different way? And so Meredith, to your point, that the job description generator that I was talking about earlier from Markle is a really interesting tool that allows, and Markle has a bunch of other tools as well, and they're all free. So I encourage you to visit Markle's website. They've got all sorts of very interesting tools and educational products for employers thinking about this. Mm-hmm. But what it basically comes down to is saying, how do you think about this job? What is so this specific job you have, when you think about the things that they have to do, how do you think about those things? And then it is able to help translate that into skills. So this person has to be able to do this skill and this skill and this skill and this skill that are sort of defined in enough of a specific way that they can sort of have a shared vocabulary with talent.
Yep.
You know, there are other interesting and challenging disconnects. Right now, our research shows that there's a kind of more fundamental disconnect between where talent is seeking jobs and where employers are putting jobs. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter what your job description looks like if it's sort of a tree falls in the forest issue, right? But at the same time, there are a growing number of people who think that they will probably never be in a trajectory where they're going to need a resume, because those aren't the type of jobs they're looking for. One, I don't think that's true. I think that they will eventually find themselves in a situation and it's going to be sort of challenging for them. But there are also amazing providers who are helping folks figure out how to write resumes and talk about their skills in sort of interview context. But two, I do think that speaks to a sort of conversation about what it means to be competent in a job versus what it means to be able to kind of write on a piece of paper what you know how to do. And, you know, I think that's particularly true when you think about, I don't know how many of the folks who are on this call today are from small to mid-sized businesses. Small to mid-sized businesses are 99.8% of all of the businesses in the United States. There are 36.7 million businesses in the United States, and 36 million of them are small to mid-sized businesses. On average, small to mid-sized businesses hire between 10 and 14 people max a year. And when you're a small business, it's more like 1 to 2. So the other thing that is playing out in this is that those hiring processes can often be more informal. They can often already be sort of informally centered around something other than quick assessment of whether someone has a degree. The challenge is that sometimes that is, I've got this one position to fill and I know the guy I want to have in this job. I literally know that person. I would like that person to be here. To Sharon's point, I know that that person will get along well with me.
Yeah. I
know that person knows this community. And that is actually a good outcome in a way, because it's a skills-based hiring trajectory, right? Mm-hmm. But we'd love to be able to support small and mid-sized businesses in being more official in the way that they are navigating some of those conversations too, which when you're talking about someone who spends maybe 2 weeks a year being a hiring manager and the rest of the time is just a manager, you need to make it as easy and straightforward as possible for them.
I want to jump back to that conversation on hard versus soft skills really quickly, and pointing to this second slide that we have right here, evaluating these soft skills. And, you know, we kind of covered this a little bit already, but Clay, my question for you is, what methods can be used to actually assess qualities like teamwork, communication, leadership, adaptability, you know, and so forth?
Well, I mean, that's the great big question right now. And again, I promise I'm not just doing a commercial for Education Design Lab, but this happens to be the space they're in a lot right now.
Yeah.
They have free and open credentials that they call X credits that are specifically about credentialing soft skills, mm-hmm. And are done in a way that is meant to sort of provide a badge that says this person has demonstrated efficacy in these spaces. And there are other interesting products in that space as well that sort of are less formal credentials and more kind of imprimatur giving. So Merit America is an organization I mentioned earlier, and Climb Higher is also an organization in that space. There's another one called Skill Up. There's a lot of them. And they sort of all have at their core the basic same model, which is that they work with folks who are on sort of non-good job trajectories. And they do wraparound support for them in terms of not only helping them with resume development and all of that sort of stuff, but also things like interviewing and basic sort of navigation of many of these soft skills. So how do you communicate in a work environment that is more formal? How do you talk about your successes in terms of teamwork or leadership? What can you do about the fact that you have a 10-year gap and you were a caregiver at home? How can you translate that into something that talks about your ability to, adapt quickly and navigate through complex situations involving internal and external, people? And rather than set those things aside and just sort of say, well, I emerged from a black hole and now I want this job. It is instead saying everything you have has value, but you have to be able to talk about it in the way that people are looking for, which is essentially articulating soft skills for them.
I think even backtracking it even more, it's really important to, yes, these soft skills are important to have across the board and for most teams, most industries, but even narrowing it down more so, again, kind of going back to Workforce's skills gap analysis feature, it's so interesting to see, what skills actually come up and lack within the workforce that they're, needing, that they're like, hey, we actually need to hire that 1 to 2 people that we might even get a year if you're a smaller business, as you were saying, to actually fill these gaps. And then go out and, apply those job descriptions, that analysis to the job postings that make the most sense, that target the candidates, the potential hires that you are wanting to target, and going from there. And instead of I think there's a lot of shooting from the hip with like a lot of these hiring practices and people saying, all right, we got to spread out a whole wide net and make sure that we're getting as many candidates as possible, because as Sharon was saying, it's really not easy. It's getting so hard to find people that are qualified already. Yep. And it's so interesting. So I think making sure you're using technology like Workforce to actually support, okay, here are the numbers behind this skill that we need, and here's why we need to fill it as soon as possible. And kind of going from there. And I think it's a snowball effect in a sense, where it kind of is like a dog eat dog world where it's just going to continually kind of go after itself. But I think it's really important to start smaller than thinking, how can I cover all these soft skills in one go in one person? Because in reality, maybe you just need somebody that's awesome at critical thinking and communication just to fill.
Well, and more than that, I think it's also important to acknowledge that most times hiring works out fine right now, right?
Yeah.
And so this is not about needing to completely throw everything up in the air and start over. It's about saying, for example, if you are experiencing shortages in candidates for a specific position, I am here to tell you that there are literally millions of people who you're not seeing.
Yeah.
Because of the kind of underlying criteria that happens somewhere along the way in a process, and or they're feeling that they can't be appropriate for your job, or that they don't know about the job. And so it's as much about saying, if I can tweak things in incremental ways, can I find more people who I think can work? So for example, one of our partners is Opportunity at Work. If you haven't looked up Opportunity at Work's website, you should. Their work is amazing, and they're very talent side, but they talk about stars, people who are skilled through alternative routes. And they have created all sorts of tools to help employers literally find individuals, find stars. And it's like a service they provide. So they're a nonprofit, but it's part of their revenue model. But they've identified 70 million Americans who are skilled through alternative routes, who are potential candidates for jobs that you have open right now, because they do have those skills. And that includes everyone from folks who graduated from high school and went straight into the military, to people who navigated through the incarceration system, people who have disabilities and for various reasons can't participate in the formal education system, people who are caregivers of children or parents or whoever and can't afford to take time from their lives and stop making money in order to go to school. All of those folks, they've sort of articulated into buckets and can help. And there's lots of tools out there that can do that same sort of thing.
Yeah, those transferable skills are often overlooked, right? I think even across hourly wage industries, we're talking manufacturing to retail, hospitality, like people are transferring over because they have the skills. It's just not necessarily seen in light as, oh, you didn't work in the hospitality industry for 5 years, next. Instead,
right.
Oh, you actually worked in the manufacturing industry. Cool. What did you do there? What kind of skills did you pick up? Looking at it from that perspective, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, y'all are employers, so this is I don't know how much this fits into the calculus for you, but it's been really interesting for me to understand that the difference in like lifetime earnings for people who are on what is essentially a non-degreed track versus a degreed track in the United States is about $900,000. So if someone can jump from a non-degreed track into a degreed track without the degree because they are able to demonstrate that they have the aptitudes and skills necessary to succeed in that job, they have the potential to transform not only their lives and their economic mobility and opportunity, but the lives of their families, their children, their communities, the tax base, etc. And what the data is showing is that for a good number of those people, they are just as good at the job as that person who went and got that degree. And I say this as someone who has a degree. It's very interesting to understand that. And like, I worked really hard for my degree. And I do believe that my degree has helped me in a lot of really fundamental ways. But I also now work with people, have staff who are stars. And it's fascinating. They bring different things to the environment because of certain of those unspoken rules that maybe they didn't learn in college. And some of those things take some adaptation to engage with, but none of them have to do with their core ability to do the job.
So interesting. I can talk about this all day. I really quickly do want to turn to cultivating a positive culture. We talked a little bit about this. Sharon actually shouted it out, saying making sure that they're getting along with other people in the company. That's really, really important. And we actually have a webinar, just a quick shout out, coming up on how to actually cultivate a strong culture. I'll be sending out an email for that later. But my question for you, Clay, is how do you see the connection between a positive culture and the success of skill-based hiring initiatives?
I think that's a really broad question. I think that the culture of an organization is articulated through a lot of actions by those who are in power within the employer. And I think, one thing I will say is that one of the barriers, as I outlined before, in terms of ROI for HR professionals, is that at the end of the day, an HR professional's job is about two things. It's about care for the humans who are in the organization and ensuring compliance for the organization. And so if either of those things feel like they're being threatened by a different process, it's very hard to sort of get inclination to move forward. And so that's part of the reason why it's so important to marry soft skills and hard skills in this dialogue about skills-based hiring, because to the comment earlier about at the end of the day, what's most important is that someone can functionally work in the work environment and get along with people. That's actually really, really true. And so you need to make sure that there is a part of this story that definitely is, we're making sure that people who come in the door can engage with and survive and thrive in this work culture. So I think that's part of it. I also think the conversation we had a little earlier about investing in employees you already have is central to creating positive work culture, because who doesn't love the idea of being valued enough that your employer will spend extra money on you? And that's true for me. I'm sure it's true for you. And I think it's a relatively universal thing that creates all sorts of positive ancillary benefits, like increased loyalty, working harder, taking fewer sick days, feeling better mentally, being more of an advocate for your organization in dialogues with other people, etc.
I want to point very quickly to this third and last slide that we have, my question for you is, how does providing opportunities for skill development and upskilling impact employees' sense of empowerment and job satisfaction? And quickly, I just want to point to this slide on 4 upskilling techniques to implement. How do these coincide with, that impact and that sense of empowerment, so to speak?
I think we've covered a lot of that. I think the last thing I would just throw in there is that, there are interesting, fairly cheap resources like LinkedIn Learning, for example. Getting a LinkedIn Learning license for your employer, so that everyone, if they want to, can access the incredibly large compendium of resources that LinkedIn Learning has, is an interesting step to take that, again, shows that you are interested in people improving themselves and so on. When that is paired with sort of clear pathways to promotion and success, and an opportunity to self-determine for each individual where they want to go and how to get there, I think that becomes a really powerful cocktail for sort of driving better productivity and participation and collaboration in the work environment. And these 4 things, absolutely, you do have to, I think that the number one thing about the skilling movement that is sort of important to say over and over again, because sometimes it gets lost, is that this is not an only technology assisted experience. Like, we still have to have humans involved in dialogues about how to upskill and retain talent. Managers still have to have an active role in supporting and mentoring and nurturing the people that they work with and who they oversee. And that may also bleed into managers needing to be trained on how to do that effectively. Because often we know that managers become managers sort of accidentally and can benefit from those skills themselves.
I asked a poll question a little bit ago. I asked, what do you believe is the most significant factor in cultivating a positive culture within an organization? And somebody said, show the employees you care about them and mean it. And it really reminded me of another one of our clients, cannabis staffing agency, and they are across the board with locations. They have a lot of staff and a lot of moving pieces. And, I think there's something to be said about, yes, making sure that you're actually paying those that are there in terms of, showing that appreciation through monetary bonuses, through, benefits, that sort of thing. But also to maybe save on some labor costs, making sure that, hey, we actually gain feedback. Workforce actually has a feature that's a shift feedback feature. You can send it out however often you want. You could send it out after each shift. You could send it out monthly. But it's essentially getting that feedback from your employees and then applying that feedback. If they're saying, hey, I really love working this shift on this day, scheduling them and making sure the scheduling is flexible enough, scheduling them to make sure, hey, they like this, so I'm going to listen to them and actually apply it. And it doesn't necessarily cost a penny. It's so simple. And I think there's a lot of those nuances with making sure your labor costs are low. You're actually giving, the incentives, the bonuses as they apply, but also making sure that you're listening to them. And as this person said, show the employees that you care about them, show them that you're listening to them and garnering feedback. I think that's really, really huge.
Yep, no, I would agree. Just to briefly say, there was a question in the Q&A about what skills library to use. There are a lot of them. Many of them come with a product that you have to buy. But the Department of Labor does have a skills library that is free to access, and that undergirds some of those products. The only challenge with it is because it's governmental, it's a little bit slow to get updated. So a lot of these organizations where their business model is predicated on it being accurate spend a lot more time cleaning it. But the DOL data is probably a good start.
Awesome. That's a really, really good point. Before we hop into our Q&A section, I know we only have a couple minutes here, but if everyone hangs tight, that would be amazing. I want to ask my final question for you, Clay. So to sum it up, what are 1 or 2 top tips, actions, takeaways that you think the audience will leave with, and how to utilize skills-based hiring at the end of the day?
Well, there's so many. I mean, I think the main thing I would say, just one thing, is that this is the type of thing that needs to happen incrementally and measurably and manageably. And that's both for y'all's sanity as well as for the sanity of the managers, the sanity of any of the folks who you're going to have to ask to make things happen, whether those are the, the people with the purse strings or the people who are articulating policies and practices for the organization. And what's great is that we're in a moment where there are a ton of resources out there that you can use to take those steps. We have a skilled credentials toolkit. I know that Meredith's going to share that link.
Yep.
We also in September will be launching something called the Skilled Credentials Action Planner, which takes that toolkit and translates it into a sort of interactive technology assisted journey where you can learn components of the toolkit and then be asked to complete portions of a work plan that then will spit out for you at the end of that process exactly what you yourself have articulated the steps are you need to take and who you need to talk to and what you need to say and all of that stuff in order to implement just one skills-based hiring and retention strategy. And I guess that's the only other thing to say is you do not need to eat the whole apple. You can bite a piece off that apple, and that's still going to have positive impact for you. And particularly if one of the things the action planner will have is an assessment at the start that allows you to understand what's the readiness of my organization, what is the readiness of myself to do this type of work, and will give you some guidance on which of 9 prospective strategies probably make the most sense for you given the answers to those questions.
God, that is awesome. I mean, this webinar chock full of resources, information. Clay, thank you so much for coming on. I really quickly want to point to Jill's question before we sign off here. Jill asked, in our qualifications, we've added work exempt to all job descriptions, which is great. However, in the union hourly environment, need qualified reviews to always be consistent. How do you handle quantifying or using part-time work to qualify someone, for example, for 5 years experience as a carpenter? I'm struggling how to measure part-time, except the way, same for employees. Any suggestions?
Well, yeah. So the answer is a little bit different depending on the profession that you're talking about. And in professions that have licensure or other sort of formal requirements, I don't think carpentry is necessarily that, but like looking in some medical professions, for example, you have to satisfy X number of hours of doing Y skill in order to sort of hit baseline requirements for jobs. And that I don't think is going to go away. In the case of something like assessing part-time work in terms of full-time capacity, I think it comes back to some of our earlier conversations about what are you actually assessing? What is inside that 5 years of being a carpenter? And is there a way for you to parse that out to say, because when you say 5 years of being a carpenter, that is essentially the same thing as saying this position requires a 2 or 4 year degree. It's not saying that they need the degree, but it's saying that 5 years of being a carpenter is a proxy for something that is more granular. And if you were able to take the time to granularize that 5 years of being a carpenter and say, what I actually mean is they need to have this level of expertise about X skill, and they need to have this level of expertise about Y skill, and they need to be able to use these tools in this specific way. Is there then a way to assess whether someone has those skills independent of whether they have 5 steady years of being a carpenter? And there are some interesting models for that. I don't remember, unfortunately, the names of them, but I was in a dialogue with someone who has created badging around core like craft and craft in this sort of sense where it's like the making of things, core craft skills, so that there is a way to sort of assess that this person has proficiency around at least the technical aspects of what you're maybe trying to navigate. You might just try Googling. I'm so sorry that I don't know that one, but you could Google it and see if you can find it. They're somewhere in the Midwest. I remember that, if that's helpful.
There you go. Yeah, at least we'll narrow it down by region. We'll get there. Awesome. I think that pretty much covers the questions. I know you answered Sean's question. That is great. I don't want to keep people too much longer. I'm going to stop the recording before I send out these SHRM and HRCI